by some of your research that I've seen online and all over the media. I know, Veya, parents are often concerned about social media, and we certainly know that there are positives in terms of connections and our young people chatting and it being part of their world. But then, of course, there are other areas in our children's social media world where I think Associate Professor Wayne Warburton would talk about the fats and oils or the poisons of technology. And so, some of your research looks at findings with regards to social media use, particularly some of the negative impacts on young people. So, could you talk to us a little bit about some of your main findings with regards to social media and young people's body image?
Yeah, of course. Over the last sort of 6 years or so, social media research has really kind of come into its own. And we now have a large body of evidence to show this. So it isn't just my research, it's certainly my research contributes to it. But generally, what we have found, and this is pretty much in all, let's say, Western countries. So we're talking about Australia, the UK, the United States. What we have found is that there are links between viewing certain types of content on social media and body dissatisfaction, drive for thinness in young girls, and drive for muscularity in young boys. We found that these particular outcomes are symptoms of psychopathologies, such as eating disorders. So they can lead to those kinds of things, and they can lead to anxiety and depression. What we have also found is that not only do we have links between them, but there's a lot of experimental research now, which is actually testing these in whether it's laboratory type situations or even in real life, where they're just asking participants to do certain things over a certain period of time. And so we can actually start to see that there are now causal effects. And this is something that I did just recently myself. Yeah.
So, expand on that a little bit when you mean causal effects. Can you explain to some of the parents on here what do you mean by that?
Absolutely. So, when we do a lot of research, what we do is ask people some questions, and then we put all that into an analysis, and we model that sort of those responses. And so that's where we find out where we can see links between different variables. But with experimental work, we can actually, for example, I'll just bring mine in. So, I had a compilation of TikTok videos and we put a compilation together and they came to 7 minutes. So I had beauty videos, and these are videos that look at beauty tutorials. So they talk to their viewers about how they can enhance their features, how to basically look better. But we also had some content in there that was before and afters. So, what someone might look before, what someone might look after. And some of these involved things such as baby Botox, so called preventative, minimally invasive procedures. Yeah. Which I think is really quite disturbing for young people. They really don't need that kind of
Mm.
thing, do they? So, what we did, we compiled these together and then we compared them with some other videos. So, we had self compassion videos and we had travel videos. And travel's obviously the neutral one. And what we found when we had an even number of girls looking at these videos, that it was the beauty videos that led to appearance concerns. So, we found that
Okay.
after 7 minutes of viewing, their appearance anxiety increased, their appearance shame increased, their self compassion decreased, and they were more likely to compare themselves with the girls that they were viewing in those videos. And we know that
After 7
comparisons,
minutes.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. And that's incredible considering the amount of videos and influencers that our young people follow online on TikTok and Instagram and so on. So what are some of the main findings from your research regarding social media and young people's body image? You mentioned there the difference between boys and girls, and we've seen that for quite some time. Can you unpack that? It sounds like it's still what we kind of knew before, that girls are really concerned about thinness and boys are worried about six packs and biceps and muscles.
that is certainly true. Some of the things have evolved in terms, probably more so in terms of girls' body image. And
Okay.
whilst let's say a decade ago, thinness was definitely the thing that girls were drawn to. There's now another element that girls need to fit into their prescription of the appearance ideal, and that is being fit and toned. So we have uh, appearance related content on social media. One trend that comes to mind is Fitspiration, where they have these really unrelenting standards about how one's body should look and what one needs to do to actually attain that body.
Would you mind just explaining to our parents what Fitspiration is? I know it's a combination of fitness and inspiration.
Correct.
Just unpack that a little bit for parents who haven't heard that term before.
Yeah, so Fitspiration is something where a creator will uh, do some exercise routines. They go through their daily eating habits. So they really try and instill a so called healthy lifestyle. But
Mm.
unfortunately, what comes with that is again an unrelenting standard about how one's body should be. I think one of the main things, and this is what the research has shown in Fitspiration, I've done a little bit on it myself, but what the research has shown is that people who create these trends and contribute to these trends are also the type of people who uh, have a lot of time on their hands. They can afford trainers. They can afford, very expensive so-called healthy food. And so it seems as though what they're doing is the norm. It seems as though what they're doing is achievable and anybody can do this. But that isn't the case. And so what happens when people view this is they tend to criticize themselves. So for some reason,
Mm.
they're not good enough. It's not the fact that the content they're viewing is actually unrealistic in most situations. They turn it back on themselves. And this is where the danger starts to come in.
And so, what is the line then, the fine line between having decent content online that does educate our young people around healthy eating and healthy exercise and staying mentally well compared to this Fitspiration? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I wish I did. But unfortunately, social media is driven so much by it's a monetary thing, and that's why people
Mm.
create content on it. So, so I always feel as though the kind of content you might see on social media is probably not the kind of content that you probably would receive your best information from. If you really want to learn more about diet, go and see somebody who really specializes in that area. I also think that much of this starts at home. If we can have, um, you know, a good, healthy environment in the household, then children are more likely to model that behavior rather than them going online and trying to find different things, because most of the time they're just fads.
Mm.
Most of the time, if you're vulnerable, you're going to be more likely to do something that might actually be negative to your health, and that's the danger,
So,
unfortunately.
Vaya, you were talking about how girls now have even more of a standard, it seems, to measure up to. It's not now just thinness, it's this needing to have this toned body. I know I've said to students and I've said to my own daughter, it depends also at what point in history you are. I know the big thing now is to have the big butt or the big buttocks. Uh, when I was young, you daren't ask someone, does my bum look big in these jeans? Because if they said yes, you would have collapsed in a heap because at that point you needed to have an ironing board type bum, really. And now the girls have to have a Kim Kardashian bum. And it's just, it seems like it's the goalposts just keep getting shifted with our young people. What are some of the mental health challenges that you've seen in your research coming out of this?
Yeah, it is very interesting what you've just mentioned there, because one of the shifts as well, when you bring in a bigger body or a curvier body, in most instances, Kim Kardashian included, often use injectables to
Yes.
create certain curves. So not only do we have the mental health issue of diet restriction, which is something that most young people have had to deal with at some point, or or building that muscle, which is what the boys tend to want to do more. But now there's this added issue of having fillers or having something that actually comes into our body to make it look or to make it conform to what the appearance standards are online. It is interesting that you mentioned Kim Kardashian, because she's now, after having done the whole Marilyn Monroe dress at the Met Gala not long ago,
Mm,
she actually lost a lot of weight in a short amount of time to fit into that dress. So she's
okay.
now slimmed down. And there's a lot of backlash on social media. And this is how quickly social media changes and evolves.
Swings.
But there is now this perhaps understanding that we are perhaps moving back to the thinness. We're moving back to losing the weight. So, as you
Hmm.
mentioned before, the cycles. And the cycles are so important, particularly to young people who are trying to find their identity. And, with young people, they're wanting to establish their autonomy from their parents. So we're talking about teenagers.
Yes.
But at the same time, they're also wanting to please their peers. They're wanting to conform to their peers. They're also trying to find their own identity. So it is really, really challenging time. And if they're feeling at all vulnerable about anything, then they're going to be more likely to take on information that isn't necessarily healthy for them. And in terms of the mental health outcomes, this is where they might isolate themselves. So if they feel they're
Okay.
not fitting in for whatever reason, if they're receiving negative comments online, if they're not getting enough likes for their pictures, these things can lead to social appearance anxiety, and social anxiety itself is all about that isolation, not wanting to interact. So these are key things that parents can certainly look out for in their children. And
And
while I
so,
have you, yeah,
yes.
sorry, I was just going to mention one thing that we don't talk about a lot is body dysmorphic disorder, which is a perceived worry. It's a constant worry about something that we perceive is flawed in our appearance. So it is separate to the eating disorders. It is more an
Yes.
obsessive compulsive disorder, but it is certainly something that is coming to the fore a lot more now, particularly with social media.
And so you're saying when a young person has a focus on a particular area of their body, perhaps, their nose or their neck or their arms, when they're watching some of these so-called Fitspiration videos, it's actually exacerbating some of their insecurities rather than helping. Okay. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so what,
Sadly.
yeah. And so what are some of the risk factors then that could lead to mental health issues like eating
Mm,
disorders, anxiety, and depression for our
yeah.
young people who are bombarded by these messages?
That's a really good question, because this is where intervention can actually come in. Uh, some of the risk factors that we've looked at in modeling is comparison processes. If you find that your child is comparing themselves constantly to celebrities or other peers, that is a risk factor, particularly when it's constant, because that comparison process can actually lead to the anxiety. It can lead to all of those
Mhm.
other outcomes. One of the other things is this internalization, we say, of appearance ideals, but it happens from when they're so young. So,
Yes.
unfortunately, by the time they're teenagers, they've already internalized what it means to be attractive and what the ideal is in appearance. And that goes for both boys and girls. A couple of the other risk factors are body surveillance. So, this is when they're constantly checking their body, whether it's in their reflection all the time, or they constantly need to check in the mirror. So, those things are risk factors. And body shame. Body shame is another huge one. And that is just the feeling that they're just not good enough.
And so, what do we do then as parents if we
Mm,
see our young people struggling with this area? Because I know a lot of parents will feel like my voice is so small compared to all these loud voices and constant voices that my teenager is hearing and seeing and following on TikTok, for example.
yeah, because teenagers just want to do what their peers are doing. So it
Yes.
is really difficult for parents. They do have a tough road, certainly, to navigate as their children um, go through adolescence. I think there are some really good things that parents can do. But before I do go into that, I just wanted to talk about one other thing that I do recommend highly, and it's it's a strategy called self-compassion. And self-compassion really helps us in those moments of distress. And it helps to regulate that negative emotion that rises very quickly when we're in a very stressful situation. And the 3 steps, it's only a 3 step process, and it is really simple but really effective. So both parents and children can do this. And simply finding yourself in a very stressful situation, uh, the first thing that we tend to do is think about our environment and think about the situation that caused us to feel so stressful. But
Yes.
instead of doing that, it's about acknowledging the emotion that's going through you. If it's anxiety, that's fine. Just simply say, hey, I'm feeling really anxious right now. That's all you need to say. There's nothing about the environment or what's happened or what triggered it. Just focus on your breath and the feeling. So if it is anxiety, that's okay. Allow it to flow through your body. And at the same time, think about how many other people in the world also experience anxiety for more minor things, but also for more severe things. So you're not alone in that experience. And we all know that when we're not alone in something, it tends to neutralize uh, the intensity of that negative emotion.
Yeah.
So think about those 2 things. And then the final thing is just giving yourself some kindness. And the one way that I find this works most effectively, when we have a physical pain, if we knock our foot, if we stub our foot on the bedpost, the first thing we do is put our hand on our toe. Or if we've got tummy pains, we usually put our hands on our tummy. And that's because the touch sends a signal to our brain that it's comforting and it's something that just helps us in that moment. But we don't do it for emotional pain.
Yeah.
So it's a very easy thing to
That's
do.
true.
It's simply you can put your hands on your tummy, on your chest, or even just give your neck, back of your neck, a nice massage. uh, that will instantly try to bring you down a little bit from that really intense negative emotion. And then just say something nice to yourself, may I be strong? May I be patient in this moment? It's okay. I've got this. So it's the kind of thing you might say to your friend that you're just going to
Yeah.
say to yourself. So that's
Yeah,
self
we're often
compassion.
kinder to others than we are
We are.
than to ourselves. Vaya, I know that you've actually done quite a lot of research into self-compassion, and sometimes we think of self-compassion as something self-absorbed or
Yeah.
prideful, and it's not. Could you tell us a little bit about your research into self-compassion and how it actually is something really beautiful and wonderful? And there's some research backed ideas behind why we say we should use self-compassion.
Absolutely. And you've brought up some really good points. And one of them is that it's self-absorbed, or it's going to make me feel more entitled or lazy even. Um, and it is a misconception. The whole thing with self-compassion, we mostly use it when we're in times of distress. It isn't necessarily something that we use when we're not feeling anxious or upset or disappointed or frustrated or any of those negative emotions. So it is a strategy that we use to help us in that moment. And that has nothing to do with self absorption. That has nothing to do with self pride. That just has self care. In the same way that when your child is ill, you want to go in and you want to stroke them, you want to talk to them gently,
Mhm.
that that's not necessarily going to make them heal faster,
Yes.
but it's something that is soothing to them. And it's just the one thing we don't do to ourselves. There's nothing proud about that.
Yeah.
uh, and the one thing that we are very good at doing, and I think that this is probably something that we've just grown up with, and that is to criticize ourselves,
Yeah.
that somehow we're to blame, somehow it's our fault. And so when we find ourselves in a distressing situation, we either blame ourselves entirely or we blame everybody else around us. both of which are not helpful. So by focusing in on you, because you're the only one you have some control over, it's just a nice way to help yourself understand what it is that you're going through and that it's okay to feel it, that many other people around the world, so it's not even just in your immediate surroundings, everyone in the world feels some suffering at some point. It
Mm.
is it's a shared human experience. And this is why group work always works so well. You know, we see lots of group therapy
Yeah.
always being such a great thing. And it's because people feel connected to others and they think, oh, hey, did you feel that as well?
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness. It isn't just me. That moment of clarity really helps us cut through those negative emotions that seem quite self-absorbed, because it's just self-criticism that makes us feel self-absorbed. It's not the self-care. The self-care is the hard part to do, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is unfortunate because we really are our own best friend. And I think the sooner that we learn to do that, the better off we're going to be. But it isn't easy when we first start. It's really hard because we've been hardwired to always be hard on ourselves, because somehow being hard on ourselves is what makes us successful.
Yeah.
Uh, and there are moments where, you know, we do need to set goals for ourselves. That's okay. You can still set those goals and be compassionate to yourself. So I think those things work hand in hand. They don't work against each other, and it's not one over the other. But we need to hear our bodies, and our bodies often know best. So if there's a problem, we need to listen. Yeah. And offer
And so
ourselves
it's
some understanding.
And so that's something that we, I think, as adults haven't learned early and we haven't done really well. And we're kind of learning now and could be something that we model to our teenagers. How do you see this then linking in with some of these concerns around body image and social media? How does self compassion or teaching our teens about self compassion help them with some of the anxiety
Mm.
or body image issues that come up when they seeing something on TikTok or Instagram, for example?
Yeah, they're really good questions. And this is what we did in my very recent experiment, uh, where we had a group of girls watch self-compassion videos. And they're just very, 1 minute, quick videos. Some of them are funny, some of them are just lovely to listen to. And what we found was appearance anxiety, appearance shame, all reduced after 7 minutes of watching these videos. Self compassion
Okay.
increased. So we know that mixing up our feed a little bit is good for us. I
Yes.
don't think it's realistic to ask young people not to watch this content. Their peers are doing it, everyone's doing it. Asking them not to do it, I don't think is realistic. So I think as parents, as educators, uh, and as people who influence young people, we need to just show them that there is different content that you can add to your feed that will
Mhm.
actually help them not become so engrossed with it. So, to the point where it becomes an obsession, because watching something like that can actually then translate into their own lives. And so, every morning when they see themselves in the mirror, they start to see something that they didn't see before. And that's because
Yeah.
they've been watching content that focuses so much on that. The beautiful thing about watching a self-compassion video is that, there might just be someone on there who tells you about their day, and then says, but you know what, I practiced some self-compassion today and this is what I did. So it spins things around, and it can help young people, but parents as well, help us understand that if we're watching uh, unrealistic, very sort of highlighted content on social media, we start to believe that it's true. We
Yeah.
start to find it difficult to differentiate between what's realistic and what's been edited, because it all seems to merge into one thing. But actually watching real people, just watching people every day do different things and talk about self-compassion, kind of puts you in a different place, in a different environment, and it tends to cut through some of that more, let's call it, toxic content,
Yeah.
which is very highly um, idealized content.
Yeah. And so it's really about balancing your feed. I know I've spoken to young people about this a lot and challenging them to really balance their feed. And I suppose then, not saying all influencers are terrible, because there would be some who would still be regarded as an influencer who is giving that balance and expressing self compassion. So, when you talk about a self compassion video, do you mean finding influential people who are good role models who actually literally talk about self compassion? Is that what you mean when you talk about that kind of content?
Yeah, we had a mixture. So I had some people, uh, talk directly about self compassion and its components and what they can do and how we deal with ourselves and our own distress. But there were also situations where, for example, a girl was just on her bed in her bedroom and she said, "You know what? I was speaking to someone today and she asked me to have a look at some self compassion content online. So I went and had a look at it, and I couldn't believe just how informative it was and how much it helped me. And so she talked about her own experience. So it's just finding what works for you, and you can mix them up. You
Okay.
can have ones where they are a bit more direct and sort of give you very clear strategies. But then you can, watch other content where young girls your age are talking about the kinds of ways that they use self compassion. So it becomes like a contagion effect in a really good and positive way.
Yes, yes.
But it is
So could
also
we
important that, as you said before, that parents start to do this as well, because we know that uh, the modeling behavior that they see from parents, that's what they're going to do themselves. So the more that parents are kind to themselves and show themselves compassion in times of stress, the more likely that their children are going to think that's a good way to deal with that. I really like that. That's good. I'm going to try that.
That's fascinating because we've spoken about the contagion effect quite a bit on the podcast before. And I think this is actually the first time you and I are talking about contagion in a positive way because it can be positive. There's such beautiful things online that young people can see and emulate. And there are, for many young people in rural areas or places around the world where they can't access a mental health expert or somebody to help them with their mental health, social media can be very powerful in a positive way there. And uh, I love how you've just said parents need to model, because one of the people that I love to follow is Celeste Barber online. I don't know, Veya, if you know Celeste Barber, you're going to have to go find it. Do you know her? I can see you nodding away.
I do.
Uh,
I do.
I mean, who doesn't know Celeste Barber? She's hilarious. And when I've actually done work with teenagers at schools, I've shown them some of her Instagram images and her videos, and she really, for me, helps me in my feed go, oh yes, when we, seeing other things pop up online with celebrities, whether you ask for them or not, they pop up on your feed, and then there's Celeste Barber doing an image or emulating something that emulating something that Kim Kardashian did, and it's hilarious, and it normalizes the rest of us going, "Oh, whoa, okay, yep, that's what it looks like to really lie in the bath compared to, how somebody else lay in the bath." So, yep, thank you for
Celeste is
highlighting that.
amazing, and I'm glad you've brought this up because my colleague, Dr. Zali Yeager, has been working with Taryn Bromford, who is a body positive activist. And they have just released a film called Embrace Kids. I would highly recommend that parents try to watch this film, even with their children together. It is
Fantastic.
fantastic. It talks about body image, but it talks about inclusivity, uh, all kinds of things that particularly that teenagers are likely to encounter whilst they're online. So it is a fantastic film. They have actually written a book as well called Embrace Kids, and there are some resources on the Embrace Hub that your viewers are more than welcome to go and read, because they've got quite a bit on self compassion, and that's where I contributed to Embrace Kids. So absolutely feel free to go and have a look at those resources. I think they'll be really, really pleased with the kind of things. And Celeste was a producer of Embrace Kids, and she also does a little bit of commentary throughout the film. So it's worthwhile
Oh,
seeing.
brilliant. Thank
Yeah.
you. And
You're welcome.
so, coming back to earlier, you were talking about ways we could help parents. So, we've spoken about the modeling and self compassion. Are there any other tips you've got for parents when we talk to our young people about social media?
I think probably the best thing that parents can do is keep an open dialogue. So that just means having conversations, but having them regularly, not, once every now and then because something's come up.
Mm,
Uh, because the more that we have those conversations with the children, the more likely we are to see if there are any issues going on.
yes,
But also, the more that we have the conversations, the more likely the child will open up. If it is just sporadic here and there, they might keep things to themselves, thinking, I don't want to burden mum or dad or someone else. So there are many factors involved, and I understand that time is such a huge issue with most households. It's really hard finding the time, but I think this is such an important issue. And people have often asked me, should parents follow their kids online and all this kind of thing. I think most researchers would say it's probably a good idea.
yes, I
The
would.
thing that I would not recommend, though, is posting anything on their social media or commenting or being really
Yes,
active on their social media account. I think,
absolutely.
as we spoke about before, they're still trying to, establish their autonomy from parents. So they really need a little bit of space. But I think it's important as parents that boundaries are still in place.
Yeah,
So just by following them, even if you just check on it, you can see the kind of content they're viewing. You can see the sort of interactions they're having. If there are some negative comments, maybe things that might be affecting them that they might not talk about. So I think a really good idea would be to just sit with them once a fortnight for 20 minutes and go, right, this is just our social media chat.
yeah,
Let's have a chat about the kind of things you guys have been talking about, what's been interesting for you. Never, ever kind of be judgmental, because that's probably the best way to shut the child down. They're not going
yeah,
to open up when someone's being judgmental or critical. Be curious and,
yeah,
you know, remember what it's like to be their age. And that is sometimes I often forget that myself, what it's like to be their age. But they
yes,
also have so much more to deal with than perhaps we did
yeah.
as teenagers. So they
That
are
word
dealing with a lot.
That word curious, I'm so glad you brought it up because it's come up with so many experts on this podcast. And it's a challenge for us to parents as parents to remain curious, ask questions about what's going on rather than always feeling like we need to give advice. And, I'm talking to myself as a parent. It's reminding myself I don't always have to be giving my children advice. Sometimes they just need to be heard. And, those some of those conversations also happen beautifully in the car on the way to somewhere. When you've noticed something on social media, you can just have a chat about what you've noticed.
Honestly, the car chats are fantastic. And this is another area where we can bring self compassion in. I use a traffic light symbol to remind us all. So, red, stop and acknowledge your feelings. Orange, understand that these feelings are not unique to you. A lot of us experience them. And green, go ahead and be kind to yourself. So, it's really easy when you're in the car and having the chat, the traffic light is right there in front of you. So if stress does come up, it's a really good reminder about, whoa, okay, how might we deal with this together? And having someone else be in it with you, I think is just such a strong point in terms of dealing with the kinds of things that young people have to deal with, but
Yeah.
also how parents are going to try and deal with their children's anxieties and concerns. Because as parents, you just want to jump in and try and save them from
Yes.
everything. But sometimes you can't be the fix it person all the time. They have to learn things on their own. And all you can do is guide them in the best way that you can. But having
Yeah.
those open conversations means that if they are struggling, they are more likely to come to you with those struggles and concerns. And if you can't deal with them by yourself, there are psychologists, there are wonderful professionals who would be more than willing to help.
Yeah. And I think that message to remember what it was like to be young, we sometimes forget that as parents. And, where you were saying, just be careful not to be active on your child's social media, it's mortifying for them. And I think we need to remember that it's hard enough for them to have us following them on social media, which is important, but then not to embarrass our children. And two of my children are young adults and they don't mind at all now. They comment on mine and I comment on theirs. And the friendship begins to emerge once your children are older. But my youngest is still in high school and I would not dare comment on his social media because I know that would be mortifying to him. And so it's reminding ourselves what it feels like to feel like everybody's judging you and looking at you and watching what your parents are doing. So, yep, thanks for that reminder.
And don't forget how self-conscious kids are at that age.
Yes.
This is where self-consciousness really starts to become very visible. So yeah, we just need to keep in mind all of those things. But as you said, when they're teenagers, they still need the boundaries. There's
Yeah.
plenty of time to be friends with our kids, plenty of time. As they become
Yes.
adults, my goodness, they're going to be fantastic friends. But there's a time, and adolescence is one of those times where they still need a parent.
Yes. Yeah. They
But
don't
the
need us to be their
parenting role
friends.
changes, it shifts from what it was
It
when they were
does.
children. Yeah,
Yeah. And so, Vaya, what is your hope for teens and families in your work and your research?
it's an interesting question because we are at a time now where one whole generation have lived with social media. So we're still really finding out so many different things about the effects of simply only knowing social media in your life compared to the generations before who had a mixture or who had nothing
Mhm.
as young
Mm.
people. So I think we're still trying to understand the effects of all of this. So it is really difficult in terms of trying to figure out the road ahead. But I think we're becoming more and more aware of not just the traps, but also the goods and the positives of social media. And we know that there are good. There's good out there. And one of the things that we do, or I've been doing with schools as well, is getting the schools on board and saying, right, let's have, a metric-free Monday. That means no comments, no likes, no nothing. You post your pictures up there and everyone feels relaxed for a day because it's not going to garner any likes, it's not going to get any comments. So these are just really good positive ways that you can share everything that you normally like to share without the worry and concern that someone's going to evaluate it. And I think there are some important things that we could do to help kids, particularly young teenagers, learn how to do things in a positive way. And having content like self-compassion online is wonderful, and I'm sure that there's plenty of other good positive things out there. Pro-social behavior, we talked about the contagion effect before. It isn't difficult. You can use the contagion effect for positive things as much as you can for negative things. So let's
Yeah.
start using it for some of those positives, and the more people we can get on board, the better. And schools are an excellent place to begin this sort of behavior because they're with their peers, they're in an environment that they know and they feel mostly safe in. So it is a really good time to implement some positive strategies when using social media.
Thank you, Via. Thank you, Vaya. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was just wonderful hearing about your research and all your work with young people and just for your encouragement.
Thank you, Colette. Thanks for having me. And, I just want to wish all your viewers a wonderful week and, just keep contact with those teenagers of yours and remember it's just a phase.